It is nearly 2 centuries since an English clergyman named Thomas Malthus published an essay on population. It foretold a day when expanding human numbers would outstrip food supplies. For many, that day has already come. The consequences of overpopulation touch every aspect of the quality of life. There is hardly a social problem that is not compounded by the strain of too many people. In much of the world, overpopulation is seen in terms of crowding, pollution, and the overuse of resources. But in the poorer nations, the issue is survival itself. We are now 4 billion on our water planet. 140 babies are born every minute. By the time this program is over, an additional 4,000 human beings will be vying for the planet's limited resources.
The problems which face us are problems involving what are called exponentials, in which the worse the problem is, the even worse does that make it. And overpopulation is clearly one example. The more people you have, the more people you're going to get in the next generation, and the curve starts increasing exponentially. And we are certainly on an exponential population increment in which there are several 100,000 people born on the Earth every day.
It sort of strikes me as strange that I'm 44 years old, and when I was born, there was only 2 billion people. So that in my lifespan, the number of people have been added to the planet that were to the same number that was built up between the year 0, which is several million years ago, and the time of my birth.
If we allow population to increase, all kinds of dire eventualities may be expected. Legal infanticide, increasing disrespect for life, refusing to keep people alive in hospitals. And in the end, perhaps nothing will work and our civilization will topple.
I've taken every economy in our country, in our world today, and I've gone over every one of them, taking the kilowatt hours per capita of that economy. And as the kilowatt hours go up, there's one exactly reverse curve, that's the birth rate goes exactly down.
Well, the population will level out. We just don't know at what level. The most optimistic estimates is 12 billion, and most pessimistic is 25 billion. So it will be in between these two limits, which is a terrible amount of people.
Central America, July 1969. At the same time that man takes his first steps on the moon, a series of skirmishes between Honduras and El Salvador marks the first population war in modern times. The primary cause of the war, El Salvador's densely packed population, has spilled into Honduras. Competition for farms and jobs leads to a brief but bitter fight between these sister nations. Over 250,000 El Salvadorians have crossed the border to seek a better life. Now, thousands of El Salvadorian refugees and their families return home, uncertain of the future that awaits them. In a nation ravaged by a runaway birth rate, these are the unfortunate victims. San Salvador, capital of tiny El Salvador. We are here to see what changes have been made since the war with Honduras. We will look at conditions here and later in Costa Rica, two representative nations trying to battle the many-headed population monster. These Central American countries are only part of the global population picture, but they demonstrate well the gravity and complexity of the problem. We begin our journey by traveling into the countryside. The cities are severely overcrowded. So too is the countryside. El Salvador has a population of 4 million people. This figure is expected to double by the end of the century. "60% of the nation relies on agriculture for a living, but there simply is not enough land. Almost every acre of arable land is under cultivation. Still, many people suffer from hunger. Aggravating the situation is an almost feudal agricultural system. A new agrarian reform program is being implemented, but due to the high birth rate, cooperative farming groups such as this one are barely making a dent in the capacity of the nation to feed and care for its people. I spoke with one of the farmers, Lisandro Colato.
Es uno de los grandes problemas, una de las variables, es un indicador del subdesarrollo nuestro.
He told me the problem in the fields is directly linked to the nation's population problem. I asked, what happens when the population doubles again? Who knows? We'll probably end up eating one another. Such prospects are indeed grim, but a new activist spirit does offer some hope.
Es necesario usar la pedagogía de la repeat the same, and at least someday the people will understand better their situation. I don't have the answer. We are only trying to do something. And I think that if everybody in our country and in all countries do as best as possible, I think that we can find at least some solution.
One has to adopt the attitude that responsibility has to go with power. And in our world these days, the sovereign unit is the nation. That's the unit that has the power. And responsibility should go with that same unit. In other words, I think that those countries around El Salvador should refuse to solve El Salvador's problems by taking on the excess population she's producing. They should simply say, no, you have to take care of them yourself. You can't move them over into Honduras and get rid of the problem that way. It's up to you. And if it hurts, then you'll do it.
Not all parts of the country suffer from overcrowding. Here in the capital's well-to-do suburbs, life is very comfortable. Some aspects of El Salvador's economy are surprisingly strong. Still, it's common to find on the fringes of the wealthy neighborhoods, barrios or slums, inhabited by those living on the margin of life.
Here in the city, we have a standard of living double the standard of living in the fields. So, you know, if you can get in the field about $2.50 a day, and if you come to the city and your average here will be $4, you will be willing to come. And the government also is viewing the situation as an integral situation, not as a particular situation of population growth. They want to cover maternity aspect, and they want to cover nutrition for children, and they also want to cover the family planning.
In the center of San Salvador is a testament to the ineffectiveness of the country's family planning program, La Maternidad Hospital. As I look around at these delicate bundles of new life, it is difficult to comprehend the consequences their numbers harbor. I asked the nurse, how many infants are cared for here? It used to be 120. Now, 150 babies are born here every day.
150 diarios.
1 out of every 5 women who enters this hospital is getting rid of a baby rather than having one. Abortions are a drastic measure of last resort. An effective family planning program would obviously be a far better solution. But some people here still believe that El Salvador should expand its population. Margaret Mead has a different view.
The endless multiplication of human beings does not add to their dignity. The more people there are here, the less we're going to become responsible for the future, the less willing we're going to be to take responsibility for the future. People are given dignity to the extent that they're necessary and participatory and recognized as individuals. You pack them into cities of 10 million people, and it's virtually impossible to give each one of those individuals high status. To be one of 3 billion people on this planet, does that dignify one more than to have been one of 1 million people, and that's all the human beings there were? Or one of possibly a few thousand human beings that carried the responsibility of the whole of evolution on their shoulders?
Julio Guzman is 10 years old. Every day he's up before sunrise to start his paper route. Luckier than many children his age who drop out of school, Julio still attends class when he can. He's also fortunate because he has a family to come home to, unlike many abandoned children.
How do you get smaller families in underdeveloped countries, in places where children very often mean farm labor or very often mean social security, a son to support you in your old age? Neither of the two extremes is right. In other words, one extreme says basically it's a question of just getting contraceptives to the people. They really want to have small families. If you give them enough contraceptives or give them access to abortion, they'll have smaller families. That's one view. Another view is modernize the country, and they will tend to have smaller families, just like we now have smaller families in the overdeveloped countries. What's wrong with the first view is that there's a lot of evidence that although there are some unwanted children in underdeveloped countries, most of them are wanted children because of the economic conditions and so on, and so that you require, in addition to access to contraception and abortion, some changes in the society to make the desire for smaller families appear.
When all his papers are sold, Julio comes home with the money he has earned. Both his parents work, but with 8 children, they can only afford the barest necessities. In a space 13 by 13 feet, the Guzman family takes shelter. His parents hope that one day, Julio will find his way out of the barrio.
We feel that the problem is ours and we have to solve it here through family planning, through better income distribution, through the improvement of the quality of life in general. I think that the government, for the first time, has a long-range vision of El Salvador. They've developed an econometric model of what El Salvador will be in the year 2000. All that comes out of this model is that the situation is very dramatic and that it will require dramatic solutions and dramatic policies. We've discovered that as of last year, something like 2/3 of the entire urban population in the 5 major cities lives in non-conventional housing, which means they live in squatter areas or in tenements or in illegal subdivisions. And the reason is that the conventional housing market has not been able to supply with them housing because of the prices. We're trying to help by producing housing that is within reach of these families. The kind of units we produce can be afforded by 90% of the families in El Salvador.
Next to adequate food supplies, no aspect of the quality of life is more directly affected by overpopulation than housing. A new program developed by a private organization, the Foundation for Minimum Housing, is meeting with good results. Even poorer families can afford $5 to $10 a month for a simple home. They buy a well-constructed shell, then finish it. This program, though limited in scale, does show that decent housing can someday be within reach of even the poorest families. With a degree of optimism as well as a sober view of El Salvador's tremendous population problem, we climbed into our flying calypso to take to the skies. Our destination, San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica. From the air, I am struck by the natural beauty of El Salvador. The country is dotted with volcanoes, which account for the rich soil, ideal for growing coffee, her #1 crop. Even steep hillsides are terraced for farmland. But El Salvador's small 8,000 square miles were never intended for a population of 4 million, let alone the staggering projections for the future. From above, there are no national borders. But national policies can make a difference as to how effectively population problems are met. We have come here because the sharp drop in Costa Rica's birth rate has been called by some the miracle of the hemisphere. Certainly one factor is family planning, and I spoke to Reverend Jose Carlo, an Episcopal minister.
Family planning has more to do with value systems than reproductive systems, in the sense that I control my reproductive systems by what I think. And the way I act reproductively is based on the value systems that I see for myself as a person. Your aspirations very often are based on what you have, a combination of what you've seen, and what you feel you can do, where you can get to. Now, when I start hoping for something better, immediately I apply that on a general scale. The community wants something better. The nation wants something better. I can't think of something better for Costa Rica without thinking of something better for Jose.
Buenas. Durante los próximos días quiero dialogar con ustedes sobre el tema de los propósitos y fines del matrimonio.
6 days a week, Padre Carlo goes into a studio in San Jose to record Dialogue, a radio program dealing with population awareness. It is heard by up to 1/3 of all Costa Ricans every day. Distant parts of the country receive the program, which airs at 4:30 in the morning, so farmers can tune in while preparing to go into the fields. Padre Carlo believes getting the word out is one of the keys to Costa Rica's success. As we did in El Salvador, we are flying to the countryside in Costa Rica to focus on Guanacaste, a province in the northwest. Here, a decade ago, the birth rate was one of the highest in the world. Today, the birth rate in Guanacaste has been cut in half. As with all of Costa Rica, the reasons for the successful decline in population growth are not easy to pinpoint. Clearly, a number of factors are involved. This area is dependent on cattle production, but despite improving economic and social conditions, some people warn there have also been serious environmental consequences.
The Guanacaste area, where man moved in, removed the jungle, planted crops, the crops then were replaced by cattle. They now have constant droughts there, and we expect that it's just a matter of time before the area becomes uninhabitable for man and for beast, and perhaps it will return to jungle. It's a very interesting kind of a phenomenon.
This is one of the only nations in the world without an army. Education is top priority. Almost half the national budget is set aside for schools. It is no surprise then that Costa Rica's literacy rate is one of the highest in Latin America, almost 90%. Most schools offer sex education classes where students and teachers can talk frankly about virtually any topic. This young girl candidly asks a question about prostitution. One can be sure a generation earlier, the subject could never have been broached.
Dios nunca aceptó la prostitución. El hombre quiere aceptarla.
The children now, they're not worried about family planning methods. But unless we get the right ideas in their heads now, they begin to conceptualize the problem of population in terms of their community. Work, health, education, roads, housing.
Or their well-being.
Or their well-being.
The small village of Punta Arenas, Costa Rica, is proud of its rural health clinic. Mothers bring in their babies for checkups and inoculations. Some demographers believe a factor in the declining birth rate in Guanacaste is the confidence a mother has in the future health of a child. Still, all of Central America, 7 separate nations, has less than the total number of doctors in the state of Tennessee. Costa Rica's family planning was not begun until 1968. Now, 1 in 4 women is using some form of contraception. After a brief medical examination, women are given birth control devices at no cost. It is impossible to attribute the country's impressive drop in the birth rate to family planning alone. But a relatively vigorous program of education and distribution of contraceptive devices seems to be paying off. Significant progress has been made on the population front in other parts of the world as well. In China, where 1 in 5 humans live, the birth rate has dropped dramatically. Access to birth control, increased male sterilization, and more women in the workforce are some of the factors helping to stabilize a portion of the world's population. But the battle is far from won. Even here in Costa Rica, a relative success story, the population may double in 30 years. Slowing population growth in the developed world is also crucial, as Paul Ehrlich points out.
Those who say you don't have to worry about population in the developed countries, in a sense, from the point of view of the health of the globe as a whole, have it exactly backwards, because it's overpopulation in the developed countries that at the moment is putting a disproportionate stress on the environment of the planet. Every person you can prevent from being born in an overdeveloped country is a birth control triumph that's maybe 25 times on the average as good as preventing a person from being born in an underdeveloped country. I mean, I would not kid you and tell you that I think we're going to manage to halt population growth by lowering births. I am convinced, as I think most ecologists are, that a lot of the halt that was inevitably going to face us in the next few decades is going to come from increased death rates. And the people who are responsible for that are going to be the people who opposed lowering the birth rate 20, 30, and 40 years ago. People ought to make their own moral decisions about abortion, and the people who ought to make them, obviously, are the women concerned. Some people think it's immoral, then they should not have abortions or be involved in doing them, but I think it's an option we have to keep open until people have access to good contraception. Remember this, if you are opposed to contraception and abortion and so on, you are automatically in favor of people dying early and in misery, because population growth is going to halt. The only question is it going to be because we have fewer births or because we have more deaths?
Even if population growth were magically halted tomorrow, the serious social and economic problems we've seen would not instantly vanish. But unless we control our numbers, our efforts to solve these problems will be doomed to failure. In the end, it's children like these that the population story is about. What is their future? What kind of world will their children inherit? Ultimately, it is up to all of us to decide.